Today is our last Sunday to look at movies as a way of breaking into the secular world and finding sacred meaning. Next month, we start to do something a little different. We're going to look at some social media things. And so y'all may want to go through all your Twitter accounts and stuff like that, start pulling things out. You can have some. All right? Got that? Danny? All right. Don't bring a bird in a cage now. That's my Twitter account. Yeah, the movies have been good. I've enjoyed the movies too. We are looking at another movie today. Y'all know what it is? Who has not heard of that movie? I want to see who it is. All right, that's my favorite all-time movie. So we'll be looking at this movie today, and it's going to compare it with a text. You know what that text is? What scripture we're using? It's Colossians. Someone read their bulletin today. I thank you for that. It's Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 14. Interesting text, interesting movie on top of that. And the way best I can summarize this is to talk about the criticism that's often given as religion as being something that has become a bad word outside of in the world. And really for good reason, I think, because it's pretty simple in my mind. God says to the people, wants you to create a culture of harmony in spite of all of our many differences. In a world that separates each other, I want you to find strength in all of your differences, and I want you to come together and unite and do some great things. And I want you to teach how this world that we live in is so much different than the world that God calls us to live. In fact, it's 180 degrees. So you have to kind of look at life a little bit differently. And I want you just to share and extend grace to all people of all walks of life, all over the world. And so we take this concept that God has given us, and what religion has done is move from experiencing and growing our faith to protecting religion by creating a fearful people who gather together with just similar beliefs and oppose those who are different. We have thousands and thousands of examples of that throughout the history of our world. And one easy example is denominationalism, right? We separate ourselves at all cost. How many of you lift up the churches in our community in prayer and thank God for their ministry and their views of life? We kind of do just the opposite, don't we? Those Church of Christ South Main people, they think they're the only ones going to heaven, don't they? Well, we don't want those Baptist tones. I had a Baptist in background, and so we start categorizing all these people. There's us who have it all together, right? We're the friendly people in the church, right? And we have a little clause in there. We're friendly as long as we like you. Well, we don't like you. We're not too friendly to you, but hey, as long as you think we're friendly, that's fine. But we start to categorize all these different groups. Those Catholics, you think they really believe what the Pope's saying? Presbyterians, Methodists, whatever. We all have those different groups of people all over the different place that are so different from us. And instead of praying for them and giving God thanks for their diversity, we find out what's wrong with them and we start to hammer away on them. That's some pretty good jokes in there, don't we? That's just kind of how we do that. I mean, that's just one of the many, many examples that we have. And so the irony of religion has always been this to me. We are called to create harmony, but we think the only way we can do that is to create an enemy as to who we can hate. The boogeyman. Someone who is out there, someone who is bad for us, someone who threatens our way of life, someone who threatens our belief system. No, for over 1,000 years, the people of Israel always held close to their standing as God's chosen people, right? And instead of using that as a way to express God in human form to the rest of the world so that they can all live in harmony, they kind of use that as an entitlement purpose. They use that to separate themselves from the rest of the world that they just call Gentiles. There's us, and then there's those Gentiles. We don't want to be like the Gentiles. In the book of Deuteronomy, it was God who took the people of Israel and called them out to be God's people from amongst the Gentiles. And he chose them to be a holy people. And the Jews became an object of God's extra special love. In order for God's extra special love to be experienced in human form to the rest of the world so that we can create a harmonious community of which to live. I mean, that's a beautiful concept. But the Jews over time began to see themselves as being privileged. We are God's people, God's chosen people. And God is not something to be shared, it is something that we are to own because God is ours. God is on our side. And so they created an enemy in the Gentiles, and so this gap between the have and the have-nots just got wider and wider. And so when Jesus tried to correct that, well, we know what happened to him after 3 years. But then after he died, Paul arrives up on the scene, and he also tries to get rid of this gap between the have and the have-nots, to be able to erase the line that existed with the Jews and the Gentiles. And so that's how we get this letter in Colossians, a Gentile convert group. And Paul has the nerve to call these Gentile converts God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. And by doing that, Paul crosses a line that was drawn in the sand for some 1,200 years by placing the enemy, the boogeyman, Gentiles, in the same category as us privileged Jews. What do you think happened to Paul? You might say he lost his head over that one. So I want you to hear these words of Paul, because he lays out the same expectations to those Gentile converts that he does to the Jewish converts. So listen to this portion of this letter. As God's chosen ones, holy, beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, with kindness, humility, meekness, patience. Bear with one another. And if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. But above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Here ends these words. Let us pray. Stretch our hearts and our imaginations and our love for you, God, even wider than ever before. That what goes into our ears will penetrate down into our hearts and be lived out with our actions. Guide us in all that we say and do, because it's important to you. Amen. The movie Dances with Wolves is really about, to me anyway, it's about an awakening that takes place in a man named John Dunbar. The movie is casted, if you don't know about it, in the Civil War. In the North and South, we know what's going on there, but there's another war that's taking place in the West. And it's when settlers began to move west and then they began to expand. There, the Plains Indians are starting to not like what they're doing. And so there's some conflict that's going on there. And so the military responds by sending out the military and create different forts throughout to help protect the rights of people to steal property. But we're not getting that one. But Lieutenant John Dunbar was sent to a fort in northeast Colorado. He arrives at this fort to set up his place as his command. He is there and he finds that this fort is deserted. But he decides to stay anyway. The problem of the movie is this, the problem with this situation is this, that the major who sent him and the person who carried him and his supplies there, they end up dying rather quickly, so nobody knows he's out there. So he is out in the wilderness, in this hostile territory. He's out there all by himself in this fort that they really called Fort Hell because of the environment in which it was in and how it was lived out. But it was deserted, and he's in the middle of this hostile territory. And so you imagine a lot of fear would be involved with that. And so during his stay there, the worst fear came true, and the Sioux Indians came in and discovered his presence, and they began to send out scouts to see what was going on. And that is when some very frightening encounters with these savages that he was taught to hate and also to fear. But finally, Dunbar decided that living in fear was not the way to live. And so he decided he was going to take matters in his own hands, and he was going to make the first contact face to face. He was going to try to communicate with them, and so he took matters in his own hands, and he sets out to go visit these people, his neighbors. And so that began the process then of establishing some form of relationship between the two people. And then the Indians, they then returned the favor, and a few visit his camp during the time, and they had some friendly visits, some good conversations. And he was beginning to see that these people aren't who he was raised to believe that they were. And so after one of those visits, he begins to see things differently and starts to write in his diary. I want you to watch this clip. Interesting clip. You know, everything that really Christ tells us to do is just for us to be neighbor to everyone else. And Paul echoes that same type of ethic that Jesus taught. And he says for us to clothe ourselves with love, to be compassionate, kind, humble, meek, patient. Yet it always seems to be that our fears tell us to do otherwise. Here, John Dunbar has found out that the enemy was not who he's told that they were. And so they both have a common concern, and that would be Tatanka, buffalo. He wants to see them. He's out in the plains. He wants to see what they look like. He wants to experience it, that they need that for food, for survival. And so one evening, Dunbar is awakened by this rushing thunder of a buffalo herd, and through his excitement, he goes out and sees what they're doing and watches this herd go by. And then he remembers his friends, so he gets back on his horse in the middle of the night and takes off across the plains. And there he finds his friends and tells them of what he'd found. And all of a sudden, they realize that he has their best interest in mind. And they invite him to be a part of the great hunt. He becomes a trusted friend, an instant hero. And these hunts, they last for several days. And so Dunbar became a part of that community just overnight, just with that little bit of trust that was established. And he found a whole new level of respect and admiration for his new friends that he never believed he would have experienced just by listening to all the rumors that were spread about him. When he returned from that great hunt, Dunbar had to go back to his fort and face being alone. Let's watch this clip. Approaching life out of love as opposed to fear is how we create harmony. And if we look at all the examples that have been placed before us just by our nation alone, we see so many things about that. You remember the Civil War that was taking place here was created out of a fear to end slavery. And the thought process was kind of interesting because the fear was that the blacks were going to take all those jobs away from the whites. And those blacks are savages. They're going to rape and murder people. They're going to steal all of our things. Remember the women's movement, the women's right movement. That was opposed also out of fear. What's going to happen if we let women have a voice? What's going to happen if we allow them to vote, to take on leadership positions? The family is going to be destroyed. Who's going to stay home and watch the family? They're just going to end up taking jobs away from men. Fear. And what's being hammered out today that touches the emotions of so many people? It's the gay rights movement. How many voices of fear are heard all the time, or heard all the time? You know, if we give those equal rights to that gay community, you know what's going to happen, don't you? They're going to destroy the family. Then everybody's going to wake up and say, you know what? I want to be gay too. Fear. God's vision of harmony cannot be created with fear. We have to trust that God knows what God is doing and not be arrogant to the point that we have to think and act for God. Faith is our trust in God that is in action, that overcomes our fears to do what is right for God. And God asks us to do so many things with our lives, and of all the things being asked for us, there is nothing stronger than the words of Paul that he wrote at the end of this statement. I want you to take these words, to read them, to listen to them, to meditate on this statement, and see how you can transform your fear into love that creates perfect harmony.